Thank you for using DPI's materials to create a common understanding of co-teaching for Wisconsin educators. The co-teaching practice profile has been developed to provide educators a clear picture of what co-teaching looks like in practice when prioritizing the critical need for equity and inclusion. The profile is divided into 4 competencies. Competency 1, designing physical space and functional structures. Competency 2, planning learning experiences for all learners. Competency 3, delivering targeted individualized instruction. And Competency 4, assessing student learning and providing feedback. This presentation will focus on the 4th and final competency, assessing student learning and providing feedback. Please have your materials ready before you continue. To maximize this professional learning activity, please be sure to review the co-teaching practice profile before you begin, especially the 4th competency, which is the focus of this presentation. You can find a link to the co-teaching practice profile on the materials document. By this time, we expect you have already collaborated with your co-teaching leadership team in your school and district to support school staff that can position co-teaching as one of a number of practices to support a diversity of learners. If you feel that your co-teaching team needs additional background, watch the first 3 presentations in the series: Co-Teaching Foundations, Building an Inclusive Environment, Designing Physical Space and Functional Structures, Planning Learning Experiences for All, and Delivering Targeted Individualized Instruction. These will assist in understanding that co-teaching practices are part of an overall inclusive learning environment. By the end of this module, you will understand the purpose of a practice profile, understand and apply Competency 4A, how to co-assess learning targets, understand the role of co-assessing specially designed instruction, Competency 4B, and understand and apply feedback within a co-teaching model, Competency 4C. Practice profiles identify the core components of a program, innovation, practice, or intervention, and describe the key activities that are associated with each core component. Practice profiles enable a program to be teachable, learnable, and doable in typical human service settings. You can find a link to the practice profiles on the materials document. Practice profiles begin with the why of each competency, the contribution to systems transformation. In this case, why is this component important to achieving a high-functioning co-taught environment? Practice profiles employ 3 rubric headings: expected, developmental, and unacceptable. Expected or proficient includes activities that exemplify practitioners who are able to generalize required skills and abilities to a wide range of settings and contexts, use these skills consistently and independently, and sustain these skills over time while continuing to grow and improve in their position. Developmental includes activities that exemplify practitioners who are able to implement required skills and abilities, but in a more limited range of contexts and settings, use these skills inconsistently, or need supervisor coaching consultation to complete or successfully apply skills. Unacceptable variation includes activities that exemplify practitioners who are not yet able to implement required skills or abilities in any context. Oftentimes, if a practitioner's work is falling into the unacceptable category, there may be challenges related to the overall implementation infrastructure. For example, there may be issues related to how the district is selecting or training staff, managing the new program model, or using data to inform continuous improvement. Throughout this presentation, participants will use an activity called Try It Out. You'll be prompted to complete the following steps after each section of this presentation. Each participant will select one strategy or suggestion after watching a section of this presentation. Make a plan on how you will implement this strategy with your co-teaching partner. If you're viewing this presentation as a group, take a moment to pause this presentation and schedule a time to meet. If you're viewing this presentation on your own, jot down the names of a few colleagues you would like to meet with. After watching this entire presentation, take the new strategy back to your co-taught classroom and try it out with your co-teaching partner. Reflect about how implementing the strategy worked with your co-teaching partner. When you meet with your colleagues, share what happened and what adjustments you may need to make. In a co-taught classroom, education teams believe that all learners can and will succeed and provide opportunities to find the expert learner in every child. When assessment data related to the grade level learning targets is frequently gathered and analyzed, teams intentionally adapt instruction and future assessment practices to meet the needs of all learners. Take a few moments to pause the presentation and watch a brief video by John Hattie on the efficacy of collective planning and using impact to assess learning. You can find the link for this video on the materials document. Remember, when you are co-assessing student learning, co-teaching partners should be thinking about how they are collecting data. Data from formative assessment is used to monitor the progress of each learner and inform instruction. Data from summative assessment is used to evaluate student learning. Further information on data collection, formative assessment, and summative assessment can be found on DPI's website. The links are located on the materials document. Co-teaching partners routinely manage and exchange an ongoing data collection using data from various sources. A few types of data collection are listed here, but keep in mind, this is not an exhaustive list. Both co-teaching partners are responsible for the collection of data. It should be noted that monitoring progress towards annual IEP goals is the responsibility of the special education teacher. However, co-teaching partners are equally responsible for monitoring progress towards grade level learning targets for all learners. The goal of data collection is not only to monitor the progress of each learner, but also inform instruction. Data-driven instruction creates a more supportive and constructive school culture. It stops placing blame on the learner for a lack of comprehension and instead creates a more supportive environment where learners and teachers share responsibility. As a result of this dynamic, learners feel supported and encouraged to succeed. Discussions around data collection with key stakeholders may include learners, family members, and other staff members. Take a moment to pause the presentation and look at the resources found on the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's data collection website. What is your current schedule for data collection? What sources do you collect data from? How do you reflect on it as a team? Remember, the first 3 steps you can do now, and the last 3 steps will be completed after viewing the entire presentation. The overall purpose of using formative assessment is to inform instruction and to help identify student strengths and opportunities for improvement. Remember, formative assessments are also designed to improve and guide teacher instruction as well as student learning. An example of a formative assessment could be having learners complete a 3-question exit ticket after a math lesson. Learners who answer all 3 questions correctly may be ready to advance in their instruction. Learners who answered 2 questions correctly may require some reteaching. Learners who answered 1 or none of the questions correctly may be lacking the foundational skills necessary to complete the problems. Co-teaching partners would use this data to plan for future instruction and design flexible groups. One teacher could provide learners with an accelerated math lesson, while the other teacher works with learners who need some reteaching. While these 2 groups of learners are working independently, both teachers can then work with learners who need to review foundational skills. These math groups will change and adjust as the results of the next formative assessment will determine the needs of the learners and drive instruction. To clarify, formative assessments can also be designed to determine if learners are making progress towards the goals listed on the Individualized Education Plans, IEPs, or Individualized Learning Plans, ILPs. For example, if a student has a goal related to reading comprehension and the whole class is participating in ongoing reading comprehension formative assessments, those assessments can also be used as progress monitoring data for IEP goals. Any data used to monitor IEP goal progress must align with the IEP goal baseline measures. Co-teaching partners should see a significant level of progression and skills in all learners throughout the school year. For individual learners with IEPs, it is a federal requirement per the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, that the progression of skills must be documented. IEP and ILP goals should not remain static. The instruction should be adjusted as the goals are met or not met, and the IEP must be reconvened as appropriate. Look back at the co-teaching practice profile for the definitions of individualized education plans and individualized learning plans. The Universal Design for Learning framework can support assessments that reflect multiple avenues to demonstrate learning. The Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, lists 3 questions that co-teaching partners should consider when designing or selecting assessments. How are the assessments linked to the learning goals? How do the assessments engage learners? What barriers might learners experience? When developing classroom assessments to determine a learner's understanding of a new concept or skill, typically one assessment is given to all learners. Why not instead offer assessment opportunities where co-teachers provide a few options for learners to demonstrate their understandings? An example is to allow learners to choose between writing, speaking, and creating as a means of expressing any given concept. Note that even though assessments are individualized, they should always assess how the student is doing in relation to the learning target. Individualizing the assessment doesn't mean making the assessment easier. It's about finding a way to allow the learner to demonstrate their understanding and growth toward grade level learning targets. Further information from CAST on assessment can be found in the materials document or by clicking the link on this slide. The Association for Supervision and Curriculum, ASCD, outlines 4 steps that learners should be able to complete independently through the use of formative assessments. 1, learners identify learning objectives and expectations. Learners should be able to infer what they need to learn from each unit in the curriculum based on grading rubrics, quizzes in their textbooks, and other available resources. 2, complete self-assessments. Learners should know how to assess their prior knowledge and track their improvements throughout a unit of study. 3, learners set their own learning goals. Based on the previous 2 steps, learners should be able to identify what topics and skills they need to master by the end of the unit of study. 4, learners identify practical steps they can take to meet their goals. Learners should know how they can conduct further research and practice skills to improve their work. Coaching learners through each of these 4 steps during each unit of study allows learners to take ownership of their educational journey. Although co-teaching partners lead their class through these steps as a large group during a unit of study, it's also important for learners to individually develop these skills as well, so they become lifelong learners. Take a moment to pause the presentation and complete this activity. Remember, the first 3 steps you can do now. The last 3 steps will be completed after viewing the entire presentation. Special considerations need to occur to ensure that the specially designed instruction in a co-taught classroom is co-planned and evaluated by co-teachers. To ensure a full understanding of specially designed instruction, look back at the Co-Teaching Foundations module if necessary. Specially designed instruction gathered in different domains, as listed on this slide, is systematically collected to monitor and evaluate the students' progress during co-planning towards IEP goals. Remember, IEP goals should not be static. If learners are meeting or not meeting their goals, the IEP team should discuss the lack of progress and make any needed revisions to the IEP. The goals should be readjusted, or the specially designed instruction should be replanned. Always scaffold instruction to the learning target and then ensure that the progress made is reflected. IEP goals constructed by the IEP team annually need to clearly reflect progress made from year to year. If a student is not making sufficient progress towards achieving their goals within the term of the IEP team should discuss the lack of progress and any needed revisions to the IEP. Co-teaching partners regularly review data from formative assessment as well as from other sources of information. This can be accomplished during common planning time to determine what effects specially designed instruction is having on the student's progress toward grade level learning targets and IEP goals. Co-teaching partners can then adjust instruction based on data. While both co-teaching partners are responsible for monitoring learner progress and the effects of universal instruction, progress monitoring of IEP goals and evaluating the effects of specially designed instruction is the primary responsibility of the special education teacher. The special education teacher brings the information regarding how the learner is responding to specially designed instruction to the co-planning session. The general education teacher, during co-planning, contributes valuable insight and classroom data on whether or not the learner is generalizing the skills being addressed with specially designed instruction in different settings and learning environments. Co-teachers then adjust the specially designed instruction as needed. It is important to remember that changes to specially designed instruction can be made without revision to the IEP, depending on how the IEP is written and what adjustments are being made. For instance, increasing the time or services needed for specially designed instruction would require an IEP revision that would need to be taken to and discussed by the IEP team. But changing the methodology or materials used during specially designed instruction would likely not require IEP revision because this level of detail is typically not documented in the IEP. In a co-taught classroom, where differentiation and universal design for learning are common teaching strategies, specially designed instruction happens naturally and, as such, can often be lost. Special education teachers in the co-taught partnership have the responsibility of documenting what is individualized or specially designed for learners with IEPs. And that way, there's a record of what is working for the learner, adjustments that may have been made, and progress that is documented. This is essential for both co-planning sessions and annual IEP meetings. Documentation of specially designed instruction is different than documenting the success rate of a group of learners during universal instruction and curriculum. This is also different than collecting and reporting out grades or scores. Other learners in the co-taught classroom may benefit from the strategies presented in co-instruction that are specially designed. However, for the learner with the IEP, the documentation is used for IEP meetings, quarterly progress reports, parent contacts, and in some cases, to prove in litigation that what was provided for the learner in a co-taught classroom was specially designed for the learner per their IEP goals. While goals are constructed annually in IEP meetings, it is also required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that IEP goal progress is periodically reported to parents. The frequency of a student's progress reports is documented in the IEP. Interim reporting on annual goal progress may be done through quarterly or other periodic reports issued concurrently with report cards. In co-planning sessions, co-teachers can document the progress made with specially designed instruction for this reporting. In cases where learners are making progress on their goals, instructional intensity is increased, and if goals are met prior to the annual IEP date, IEP teams can use the I-10 form to construct new goals with agreement from the parents. For further information about the I-10 form, you can refer to the Guide to Special Education Forms, which can be found on the materials document. Any of the domains of specially designed instruction are appropriate for a special education teacher to be planning specially designed instruction around in a general education classroom. When planning for specially designed instruction, it is important to remember that learners with IEPs need to generalize skills. Generalization involves demonstrating or performing a behavior in settings that are different from the original teaching environment. If the behavior plan is not consistently followed in all environments, behavioral changes may not be maintained. The same is true whether we're talking about behavior, academics, communication, etc. Take a moment to pause the presentation and complete this activity. Remember, the first 3 steps you can do now. The last 3 steps will be completed after viewing the entire presentation. According to John Hattie, feedback is one of the most powerful of all influences on learning. In Competency 3, we discussed the power of feedback through the use of high leverage practices. The high leverage practices are research-based practices and are known to foster important kinds of student engagement in learning. They are a collaborative effort of the Council for Exceptional Children, its Teacher Education Division, and the Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform, or CEDAR, Center. Its members include practitioners, scholars, researchers, teacher preparation faculty, and education advocates. If you would like to learn more about the high leverage practices, you can watch the Competency 3 presentation or visit the High Leverage Practices website. Both links can be found on the materials document. High Leverage Practice 22 states that the purpose of feedback is to guide student learning and behavior and increase student motivation, engagement, and independence. Effective feedback must be strategically delivered by both co-teaching partners and is goal-directed. Feedback may be verbal, nonverbal, or written, and should be timely, contingent, genuine, meaningful, and age-appropriate. Feedback is most effective when the learner has a goal and the feedback informs the learner of their strengths as well as areas needing improvement. Remember that parity is important here as both co-teachers need to provide feedback to all learners in the classroom to ensure equitable practice. According to John Hattie in his book, Visible Learning, feedback is compelling influence on learner achievement. When teachers seek, or at least are open to what learners know, what they understand, where they make errors, when they have misconceptions, when they are not engaged, then teaching and learning can be synchronized and powerful. Feedback to teachers makes learning visible. During co-planning sessions, co-teaching partners should decide on how they will provide feedback to learners. Feedback starts with learning targets that are rigorous and aligned with grade level standards. The process of giving feedback begins with co-teachers clarifying the learning targets for the activities they are undertaking and the success criteria by which they will assess the level of achievement to be demonstrated by learners. The learning targets are then shared with the learners in a co-taught classroom. This enables the learners to measure their performance in terms of both mastery of the set task and the processes inherent in it. It also helps them to be clear about future goals. Co-teachers bring the learners' feedback to the co-planning session to assist them in determining the next instructional moves. In order to create a feedback loop, co-teaching partners then share the next instructional moves with their learners. Helen Timperley and John Hattie note that effective feedback is most often oriented around a specific achievement that learners are or should be working toward. When giving feedback, it should be clear to learners how the information they are receiving will help them progress towards their final goal. Take a moment to pause the presentation and observe how one teacher provides his learners with effective feedback. Watch the video Formative Assessments using feedback to guide instruction. The link is located on your materials document. When co-teaching partners model how to provide positive and supportive feedback, they can then begin coaching their learners how to provide their peers with positive and supportive feedback. This will lend itself to developing a safe and collaborative classroom culture in which all learners will benefit. Precision partnering is a structure for classroom discussion that is explicitly taught to learners. Specifically, we teach the 4 L's. The first L is that learners should look at their partner. The general rule of thumb for partners is to make eye contact, but we know that with learner variability, this may prove uncomfortable for some and unrealistic for others. So in that case, it is okay to teach learners to make a plan so that they are showing signs to their partner that they are listening to them intently. The next L is lean. Partners should lean towards each other when they are listening. Again, the idea is to visibly show their partner they are listening. So if you have learners who are unable to do this, the idea is to make a plan so that their partner knows they are being heard and the teacher can see partners actively listening to one another. The third L is instructing learners on the level of voice they should use in discussions. With an entire class talking to one another, it can get loud if learners aren't using a low voice. For younger learners, it can be helpful to teach this L as library voice. If you have learners who are using an augmentative or alternative communication device, you will want to ensure the volume is set such that it is not interfering with other conversations, but still is at a volume that allows the learner's voice to be heard. The last L is for listening. Most of us believe we are good listeners and that it is not something that needs to be taught. The reality is we are often listening to respond or become distracted while we are listening. Explicitly teaching learners the art of active listening is beneficial for participation in precision partnering and will also transfer to limitless instances beyond your classroom. Co-teachers are in a unique position to demonstrate this type of classroom discussion. Co-teaching partners take advantage of having two teachers in the room to model how this will look for the learners. Take a moment to pause the presentation and watch a brief video titled Teaching Students to Give Effective Peer Feedback. You can find a link to this video on your materials document. After watching the video, complete the Try It Out activity. Remember, the first 3 steps you can do now. The last 3 steps will be completed after viewing the entire presentation. High Leverage Practice 3 supports the importance of feedback between co-teaching partners, learners, and families. A critical element of effective teaching is to build collaborative relationships with families to support learning and to enable learners to access needed services and support. Principles that promote a positive feedback loop with educators and families revolve around communication, professional competence, respect, commitment, equality, advocacy, and trust. When co-teaching partners are highly committed, they will effectively share resources, identify family strengths and needs, and build trust with families. When co-teachers practice professional competence, they will effectively communicate and advocate for families' rights under federal, state, and local laws. The next few slides will explore these concepts in more depth. Consider this graphic from the publication Families, Professionals, and Exceptionality, Positive Outcomes Through Partnership and Trust. The concepts of communication, professional competence, respect, commitment, equality, and advocacy support a feedback loop that connects parents to the co-taught classroom. Without the cornerstone of trust, the whole arch will collapse. Refer to this graphic again in the activity at the end of this section. Co-teaching partners work together to communicate feedback to both learners and families. This is an important piece of the co-teaching commitment. To continue to build a trusting relationship with families, communication must be timely and ongoing. It is also important to find out how families would like to communicate. A few ideas are face-to-face interactions, which can include planned formal and informal meetings, open houses, classroom and school volunteering opportunities, home visits, and other forms of face-to-face interaction. Written correspondence, phone calls, or technology-based means of communication, such as emails or texts, or course management systems, school or classroom websites or blogs. For more information on feedback, consider the resources from DPI's Family and Community Engagement page, which is located on the materials document. Take a moment to pause the presentation and discuss or reflect on these 3 questions. While co-teaching exists to capitalize on instructional impact as 2 teachers serve all learners, the relationship between co-teaching partners must be meaningful and genuinely authentic. Collaborative attitude and ability will impact the success of all learners. At any point in your co-teaching journey, please remember that recorded webinars and additional resources available on DPI's co-teaching webpage can assist you in preparing for any co-teaching experience. Thank you for taking part in DPI's co-teaching series.